Um, since you're talking about the leaders, can you expand on that battle?
Well, fill in a little bit of background on this. There were a young Korean came last year. His name literally translates to pine tree, so that's what he calls himself when he's in America. And Pine Tree last year did not complete the race. He got to the halfway point. He took home a visitor's rock with a plate on it, and he wrote me an email shortly after the race last year and said, "I'm coming back." And we did have a little discussion before he actually physically left the race last year. He said, "I'm thinking about bringing a friend of mine, and he's pretty good." And I said, "Okay, that's fine, welcome him," and so on. He didn't bother to tell me that he was bringing somebody back to win the race. Um, the Sim J. Duck is the person who won this year, and Sim sort of came out of nowhere. He could speak very little English, whereas his friend Pine Tree could speak relatively good English. And I met the two of them on Thursday. They flew halfway around the world. It took 32 hours, I believe, by airplane to get here with all the delays in between. And all they wanted to do was say hello and go to bed. And they basically spent all of Thursday and part of Friday trying desperately to reorient their world to ours, being almost exactly 12 hours different. Um, and they apparently did at least one of them did a very very good job of doing that. We they had no arrangements for transportation. We had to take care of that for them and so on, but that was easy to get people to volunteer to do. Um, and they were very, very prepared. Pine Tree told me that Sim had done nothing in the year prior to this year's MMT but train for MMT. This was the race he was training for. It turns out that if you look at his race application, he listed several 100-kilometer runs in Korea, and I assume they're major runs that he had won. So we knew he was good. We just didn't think that he was going to last past the 100-kilometer distance, so, which is only 62 miles, and make it to a full 100. You can be great at 100K and die at mile 80. And in fact, I had a conversation, very brief conversation, with the second place person, Carl, this year. At about halfway through the race, I caught him coming off Kearns Mountain the first time. And I said to him, how's it going? And Sim was not even 30 feet away at that point. They were running so closely together. And he said, as long as I can see him, I can catch him. He's never gone above 100K. And that was his idea, to keep him in sight until the end, and then just hope that the distance would get to him. And Carl's extremely experienced, won most of the major hundreds in the country, the more difficult ones. He doesn't do the easy ones, and he thought he could reel him in. It turned out that they got very, very close several times in the next 25 miles, up until about mile 75. Then there was a gap that developed, but then it got close again. And the real finishing punch, if you would, occurred between the last two aid stations. From Powell's to Elizabeth Furnace and Elizabeth Furnace to the end, that's where an 18-minute gap developed between the two. Carl just couldn't keep up with Sim. Every time I saw Sim, he was, in part, I think, because I was one of the few people he knew and had spoken to through the translator, so to speak. I'd get a big smile. He was deadly serious until he saw me, and then he'd wave and smile, and he'd go to his drop bag. He had prepared a drop bag, a little drop bag. Oh, we know about this from the replacements. They didn't realize how much train traffic
Oh,
there is by the football stadium in Baltimore.
there's a lot of airplanes around this area.
BWI is 10 miles
Yeah,
away, but luckily my
it's
house
pretty
sits here
close.
and the runways go like this, so
Yeah, so they're usually going the other
they
way.
usually never cross close enough to do that. But
All right.
that was a small plane, so he's going
Um,
all over the place. But anyway, Sim had prepared. We have 16 aid stations. He had prepared 16 drop bags. They were all small drop bags. They had, as I understand, they had ginseng tea in them. They had a couple of other foodstuffs that he had brought that he was used to. You know, all of us when we go to races like to have things that we're comfortable with. It's easier if you're in your own country because you're used to the food that you're likely to be served. He was afraid he wouldn't be used to the food, so he made sure he had some, as he called it, Korean food in the bag. Pretty simple stuff. He could have actually picked some of it up right off the aid station tables. Um, what was interesting about him is that it took a while for him to get comfortable in the race. At the beginning, I saw him through the first two aid stations. He was very distracted. He came in, he couldn't figure out our drop bag system. He couldn't find his bag right away. He was trying to say things, but because his English was so poor, he couldn't communicate to us with what he wanted. We eventually figured out it was his drop bag and he wanted water. And he took some water and maybe some Gatorade from each of the aid stations, a little bit to eat, but very little. And then he would be on his way. By the third aid station, he was comfortable. He was spending 30 seconds in an aid station. As I say, I saw Carl several times. I think Carl actually led the race for at least maybe 10, 15 miles, somewhere in the middle. He did pass him. The lead was probably not more than a minute or two, though. And those two battled back and forth all day. It was absolutely amazing until that last 10-mile section that, and I'm not sure if Carl just got fatigued, if mentally he was just tired and slowed down a little, or what happened in that particular point. One point on that, this is the second year in the row that Carl Meltzer has had the honor of being beaten by a total unknown. And that really had to frustrate him. So I'm positive he's coming back next year. He wants to win this thing. Hopefully no other person shows up like that he's never heard of.